Despite a crackdown to bring violence over voting reforms in New Caledonia under control, there are still roadblocks and trails of smoke rising in parts of the capital, Nouméa. During emergency talks with local leaders, French President Emmanuel Macron called for dialogue to end a 12-day state of emergency. He said he's delaying voting reforms in the French overseas territory and says changes won't be adopted by force.
I have pledged that this reform will not be forced through in the current context, and that we will allow some weeks for a calming of tensions and resumption of dialogue to find a broad accord.
Indigenous Kanak people rose up on May the 13th over electoral reforms imposed by France. The changes would give voting rights to French nationals who've lived on the island for 10 years. But some Kanaks fear the plans will dilute their voting power and derail efforts to secure independence.
We've been lied to for years and years. They've lied to our ancestors, they've lied to our elders through the various agreements that have been made. We're on our third agreement. It's the longest. We're tired of not being recognised.
I'm convinced that the solution is not political at all, because whether we decide one thing or the other, half of the population will be frustrated. This is not something that we can accept, perhaps for an election, but not for a future.
Local politicians say more has to be done to address Kanak anger over unemployment, failing schools, hunger and poor housing conditions.
There's ideas about how we rebuild our society in the long term. It requires a social project, obviously a social project in partnership with economic players to rebuild, but perhaps in a different way from what we did before.
French security forces are expected to remain in New Caledonia for as long as the tensions last. Barbara Angopa, Al Jazeera.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.